Hey everyone, Christy Wimber here. Really glad to be with you today. I am excited to have my good friend Kay Warren just sit down and have a chat about mental health. And before I introduce Kay, let me say this about Kay that I absolutely love. Kay's actually one of the people, if not the main person, that really shifted me towards the theme of mental health. And I just want to chat even a little bit about how she did that with me and just encouraging me, because I think she's really gifted in this area. So I love her. She's a great friend. Welcome, Kay.
Thank you, Christy. It's really good to be with you.
Will you just take a few minutes and just tell us about who you are and a bit about what you do?
Yeah. So I grew up in a pastor's home, and then I married a pastor. So ministry is really the only life I know. I jokingly say I have no idea what real life is like. I only know
That's so
pastor's
true.
home. But it did shape me very much into who I am. Rick and I started Saddleback Church in 1980. So we're finishing up our 42nd year. We've just announced that we're looking for his successor. So the whole bulk of my lifetime has been at Saddleback, and that's about to change. We're not going anywhere, but he is going to give up that leadership position in the next couple of years. That's what we're planning. We'll see what God has in store. I think I've always been an advocate of one sort or the other. My heart has always been turned toward to people in poverty, to people on the margins, people who are vulnerable, and yet that sort of got sidetracked when I was raising my kids and my family. I was super involved in the church. That was our life, my family and my church. And then as my youngest son, Matthew, was in high school, it felt like a senior in high school. It felt like maybe that a season had opened up for me to do something even more active with advocacy. God did this whole big thing, which is a whole big story, which I won't go into, but through a very direct leading of the Lord, I felt called to become an advocate for people with HIV and AIDS and for orphans and vulnerable children. And I spent a decade as a global advocate calling the church to care for here are people who are often in poverty, who are vulnerable, who are marginalized, who desperately need the love of Jesus. And I loved that decade of my life. At the same time, Matthew, our youngest, had been experiencing pretty serious mental illness for most of his life. And it reached a culmination in April of 2013 when he took his life. And that day, amongst other life-altering changes, I knew that God was changing my advocacy, that he was taking me from a decade about advocating in the church for people with HIV and for orphans to people living with mental illness. It went from, it was something that we talked about, but not all that much because it was Matthew's life. But now that he was in heaven, there was a very clear shift of my advocacy. So for the last eight and a half years, that's where my focus has been on, in the same ways almost that I did around HIV, calling the church to care, calling the church to recognize here are millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people living with various degrees of mental illness, and what the church can do about it. And that's where I am today. That's where I spend the bulk of my time.
Wow. Well, I mean, obviously super effective in so many different areas that you mentioned. But like, Kay, can I just ask you this in the context of like, as a leader, so as a church leader, obviously going through some very traumatic, horrific, life circumstances, like, how have you as a leader been able to like take time to heal? Like, what does that look like? Or what did that look like for you? Like, how did you do that?
In some ways, it felt like I didn't have a choice. I couldn't breathe. After Matthew died, I simply couldn't breathe. To get up and brush my teeth was a good day. I didn't care what I wore. I didn't care what I ate. I wasn't even sure that I wanted to keep living. I wasn't sure that life could ever be good again. And I know there are people after the death of a loved one, or the suicide of a loved one, or the death of a child. I know that some people don't have the privilege that I did. I was able to take 4 months of just intense. I didn't go to church. I didn't even go to the grocery store. I was just barely surviving. And I realized that many people don't have that privilege. They have to get up after they're a week off from work, maybe, and go back to work and start resuming life the best they can. But I don't know how I would have done that had that been my circumstance, because I truly couldn't even breathe. And so it felt like more of a necessity than anything, rather than an optional, well, I'm going to take the time to grieve. It was like, I have to somehow be able to do more than get up and make a cup of tea. I've got to be able to live again. And our news was public. We're public figures. And so it wasn't like it was anything we could hide as if we would have wanted to. We didn't. So we were public, and we were grieving, and we were healing, and we were trying to find our way through the absolute shattering of our lives, a shattering of our family. And our church was incredibly gracious to us. They put no pressure on us. Feedback, be yourselves, keep going, encourage us, feed us, help us. They just gave us the space emotionally and physically to try to put our lives back together. And I think what I've figured out is that grief, this is the hardest work I've ever done. I've done a lot of soul work. I'm 67 years old. I've spent a lot of time under the tutelage of the Holy Spirit for God to change me and make me more like Jesus. But this grief work has been the hardest work I've ever done. And it's not over. It's not like you get over this and you reach this point in which you say, oh, this thing happened to me. But, I don't think you ever get over losing a child. I think you get through it.
Is it almost like where there's like a before and then an after?
A very distinct before and after. April 5th, 2013, I had a life that before that, and I've had a life since then. And this brand new normal has taken every bit of effort, every bit of intentionality, every bit of decisions to do that work of healing, of grieving, feeling what we feel, trusting God again, believing God again. So for me, it didn't even feel optional. It just felt like I won't be able to live. I won't be able to function if I don't find my way back to God, because it caused some real struggles with God. If I don't find my way back to beauty and the goodness of life and the desire to keep living.
Yeah. Well, I mean, gosh. Well, first of all, I thought you were 65, so you're welcome. And second of all, it's kind of remarkable, you guys leading a church and your church giving you that much space. I think in culture, like, we don't do that with leaders, where we're not very good. So, like, you had to encounter people that didn't understand, and obviously said things, and acted in ways that were hurtful. So how do you, like, as a leader, when people say stuff to you, when you're in a difficult situation for whatever it is, and people don't understand, like, how do you deal with that?
I like I said, I've been in a ministry home my entire life, and so I had my mom and dad to watch and learn from what they feel like what I feel like they did well, and what I feel like, oh, I need to do that differently.
Right.
And Rick's parents were also ministry family, so we've been surrounded and been able to glean from what feels like, oh, that's healthy, and we need to do that a little bit differently. And one of the things that I kind of learned from just my own home was that I wouldn't say that my parents did a really good job of taking care of themselves. They were just always by that I mean they were just always at the beck and call of the church. Right. They pastored in smaller churches, and I get that I have some privilege that they didn't always have. But nevertheless, they just were, I remember all the meals that were interrupted by the phone call, a parishioner calling and needing this. And my dad, because we lived just always a few doors down from the church, my dad trotting off to whatever, making the hospital call. They just were always at the beck and call. And so family got a little bit of a short shift in there.
Yeah.
My dad basically burned out by the time he left ministry. As he got older, he was just worn down to the nub. And Rick and I just said, we're not doing that. So we've always made it a priority to take care of ourselves. The thing is, nobody's going to take care of you but you.
Right.
Nobody. Even if you're in a strong marriage where you take care of each other, even if you're in a church situation where the elders or the deacons or the board care for you, at the end of the day, there's nobody going to take care of the leader except the leader. And so we accepted that responsibility to care for ourselves spiritually. If I'm going to be close to Jesus, it'll be because I choose it every day. It won't be because what anybody else can superimpose on me. If I'm going to be well emotionally, it's going to be because I've chosen to do the work. If I'm going to be well as I can physically, there's some choices. Can't control it all, but it's like control the controllable and leave the uncontrollables to God.
That's one of my favorite sayings.
Yes. Well, so any leader who's looking at this going, so how do you do that? It's some of it is you have to make a decision that is going to be a priority for you, and then accept responsibility to do it, because nobody else is going to do it for you.
Absolutely. So, like, one of the things that I see, Kay, a lot in relationally and in the parts of the church that I'm in is that mental health is obviously so vast, but a lot of leaders don't, know how to care for themselves emotionally, don't know how to just focus on that part of their life. Like, that's just not a part of the training. That's not part of, what's been ingrained in the values. And so, but you have to, like you said, you have to own this for your own life. You have to make that decision to grow and to change. And in the area of mental health as well, taking time and creating safe spaces. And so I often see leaders who don't share their lives because they're so afraid, of what that will mean. So how have you as a leader found like safe spaces? Like, what's like one or two things that you found like, oh, this is a safe space where I can share me, not necessarily share what you've been through, but you know what I mean? Share about you.
Right. Well, you have to create it. Again, because rarely does it just fall into your lap. Sometimes when we're in ministry, there are just these natural relationships that build because you're serving Jesus together. And so trust and safety builds over time. And so I would say, first of all, you have to invest. You have to do some of the work. So you have to invest in people and find people over time that can handle your stuff. I would say the best piece of advice is don't confide in a brand new Christian, because a brand new Christian does not have the ability yet to handle the feet of clay that every leader has. But there are people that sometimes, like I said, naturally occur as you're serving together. Trust builds over time. And then if that doesn't you have to seek it. And I am a firm believer in a good Christian counselor, benefited from it so many times, both in our marriage and personally, so much. I am an absolute firm believer in that. There's a stigma, though. You mentioned it. You didn't use the word stigma, but there is a stigma against being in need. And anytime a leader is afraid to let some people in, the pressure that puts to be good, always to be right, to know every answer, to always love Jesus with your whole heart, to have that emotional health, that's a pressure that doesn't have to be there. We don't have to cooperate with that. I can't stop people from expecting things of me or having expectations that are maybe so high. I can't stop that, but I can decide what I do with it.
Right.
And I don't play the game.
Yeah.
I do not cooperate with those expectations, not in a rebellious, like chip on my shoulder kind of way,
Right.
an angry way, but just more of a matter of fact. When
Right.
to be able to say, even when people want you to be at this certain thing, and to not give into that unless it's right, unless it's good, unless this
Right.
is going to be healthy, but to be able to say, oh yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to go to that. And then if people say, well, why not, or whatever, I don't have to give any more answer.
Yeah.
It's learning not to defend yourself against that, not playing the game. If
Yeah.
you're sitting on that big pedestal where everybody puts us as leaders, you can either choose to stay there or you can choose to get off. And
Yeah.
I've done my best to get off that pedestal by being real.
Right.
That doesn't mean I tell everybody everything.
Right.
Man, there's some conversations, this, they're only for Jesus.
Yeah.
They're only for Jesus' ears and mine. And then some things are just, there's what I would call concentric circles of relationship. Everybody needs a few in a tight circle. And then the further out you go in those circles of relationship determines what you share. But everybody's got to have a few people in that place where you can just be a person, not be a role, not be a leader.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, at the end of the day, so many leaders will say, that the fear that if I do actually share, then that's going to be used against me, or I'm going to get fired. Or, I mean, I hear those things all the time. And in fact, especially in the area, okay, with mental health, where I know leaders who have been fired for sharing that they had, mental ill health. And so it's a valid concern, put it that way. It's a valid concern. You're putting yourself out there, then that's the risk that you're going to be rejected. That's the risk that you take, that you're going to be judged. Probably not the right people to talk
but you
to.
end up, it becomes a sort of it becomes then a weapon in the hand of the enemy. It becomes a tool that he uses to keep us unhealthy.
Right.
And I'm
right.
pleading actually for a different viewpoint. Yes, it is risky. And yes, people have lost their jobs. And yes, people get gossip. All of that is true. That is not saying like, oh, if you share, everything's just going to be great. No, there are risks to it. But if you live in that kind of fear, then you end up with a different kind of ill health mentally.
Right.
You live with a kind of pressure.
Right.
And we've all watched people, been in ministry my whole life. The road is littered with people who cracked under that kind of pressure, that kind of, it forces us to hide. We have a ministry at Saddleback called Celebrate Recovery, which and it's around the world. I mean, like 7 million people have gone through Celebrate Recovery around the world. And the whole premise is you're only as sick as your secrets. So if you have a safe place where you can tell your real life and then have others who are there to help support you toward health, toward balance, toward that sense of shalom, that goodness and peace that God wants for us, then I think there's an opportunity for people to live differently, not in that place of hiding, not in that place of fear of exposure. Listen, ministry's rough. It's hard. It's hard. And we make it harder on ourselves sometimes when we play the games that keep that ridiculous cycle going. I don't want any part of that.
I like the language actually of not playing the game, because I think, obviously things don't change unless somebody's willing to go up against it and make those changes and to shift the culture. That's how culture changes.
Right.
I think, especially in the area of mental health, where I think sometimes we kind of focus on the pressure and what could go wrong instead of the payoff, because the payoff to be able to kind of share your life, like I've had to walk through this where, the payoff of not having to carry everything on my own. And, it releases that pressure in a new way. Does it bring other ones? Yeah, but the payoff in this is really worth it. So I think like what you're saying, the element where the enemy loves to, use fear to keep us from sharing our life, or fear from change, or fear from, like, honestly, where people going to a therapist, they think, well, I can't do that because then that shows I don't have enough faith. Well, that's nonsensical thinking. It's like we're not wired to actually do all of this. Ministry is so hard. If you don't have somebody to talk to, then you literally will implode, I think.
Well, I think it's a misunderstanding, as though that is what God is asking. I think it's one thing if people think, well, that's what my church wants, or that's what the Christian world thinks of me.
Yeah.
But I think underneath all of that even is a misunderstanding that this is what God has asked, that God has asked us to carry these burdens by ourselves, that God has asked us to have faith so that nothing ever goes wrong or bad, or we never have any physical problems or mental problems. And I just think that is a complete misunderstanding. If anything, the Bible talks in Psalms, he knows that we are dust. Yeah. Dust is pretty vulnerable. Dust is pretty low. And if God knows that we are but dust and need him, then that's why I think the enemy can just use it as a whip against us, a flailing of, not only are you letting your church down, but you are letting God down by admitting you have a weakness, or you have a need, or you have an illness. And I just think God's eyes towards us are compassionate, not judgmental. And God does not expect of us the kind of perfection and lack of need that we expect of each other.
Yeah. Well, I agree now. I didn't necessarily agree earlier, but I agree now. It took me a while because I've been on this journey of like learning more about other parts of, that are important to the Lord, the emotional side, where you can be incredibly effective as a leader and never actually address your emotional side to a point.
Yeah.
And so I've walked through that.
I think that's key. Yeah. I think that's key. I think that I think fruit that lasts really comes out of health. Anybody, almost any tree that I may get myself in trouble here because I'm heading down an analogy that I haven't thought through, but we'll see where it goes. I think almost any
scriptural, okay.
Any tree can produce, a little orange. But if you want a healthy crop, man, the tree has to be healthy from the roots up. Yep. And we want fruit that lasts, even beyond us. And so fruit that lasts needs to be built out of health, needs to be built out of wholeness. Couple things I would say, just I was thinking when you were talking, I also think there's a misunderstanding that God is not recognizing that God is an emotional God. Yeah. And so when we as beings made in his image, we are made in his image in every way, including God is a God of emotions. Yeah. Read the scripture. He's got every emotion you can think of.
He's more emotional than anybody.
That's right. So if we are in his image and we are going to live as those tripart beings, we're going to acknowledge emotions and acknowledge, hey, anything can go wrong physically, things can go wrong spiritually, things can go wrong emotionally and physically in our bodies. Right. We have to take care of every part. Every part needs to be as healthy as it can be.
And I think it's important, especially in some parts of the church, Kay, where that weakness isn't a sign of being less spiritual. It's just a sign of being human.
It's a sign of being human. And we live in bodies. And the brain is a part of the body, and things can go wrong in the brain. Yeah. And when they do, that's not a cause for shame. Exactly. It's a cause for compassion. Right. It's a call to care for each other and nurture each other and help each other back to health.
Yeah. And I think there is that, because I have seen this for years in the church where people can be so effective, and I think that they can confuse their effectiveness with thinking, oh, I don't have to, acknowledge this other part, this mental health part of who I am. I mean, I that was me, if I'm to be honest. I'm very, very effective, and it wasn't like I didn't not visit it. Like I would visit it, I just didn't want to live there. You know what I mean? Like, I'll visit, but I would like to move forward. I would just like to build now. Can I just build something? And a lot of leaders think like that, and but I've found actually in acknowledging, like, first of all, you really will end up imploding because you can only handle so much. But I've also found where when you address, the areas within you regarding your own mental health, it makes you stronger as a leader.
It does. Well, oh, so many things. But one of the things I was thinking of is when you were talking about is we want to reproduce when we're talking about fruit and producing fruit, but we all want to reproduce disciples, and we will reproduce what we are.
Yeah.
You can't produce if you are personally unhealthy in an area, you're going to reproduce that in the disciples that follow, that listen, that are under your care, under your leadership. And I think if all of us had a choice, we would all say, no, I want the healthiest disciples possible.
Yeah.
I want them to be healthy emotionally and physically and spiritually and mentally. And so, well, we're only going to reproduce what we are ourselves. And I want the disciples that have come from our ministry to be even healthier than I am, not less.
Yeah.
I want them to surpass me in health. And so when leaders think, well, the evaluation of my ministry is I'm effective. You're effective in reproducing disciples who are like you. And if there's those weak places in you, just know that you are probably producing disciples who have that same weakness. Yeah. And if we want better for the people coming behind us, the people under our care, we have to really take that seriously.
Yeah, that's another reason why we need the whole of the church, because some churches are better in this area, some churches are better in this area, and kind of going outside of your camp, especially if you're a leader, you got to go outside of your camp sometimes to get what it is that you need in the area that you need to grow, that maybe you don't necessarily have that where you are, and that's okay. And that's a really hard thing for a lot of leaders because they feel like they're being disloyal. It's humble. Yeah, you have to, I guess so. Yeah, you have to.
I've appreciated that about you so much, Christy. I really have. That is one of the things I admire and respect about you is you have a great humility, because you have been very effective and God has used you in so many ways, so many people's lives. And at the same time, rather than just staying content in that, you have had such a humble heart in seeking God and asking, hey, is there something else you want to say to me, Lord, that I might not have heard in the same way? And you have a humility of heart that I really admire and respect.
Well, thank you, my friend. I mean, what am I supposed to say to that? Yes, I so humble. Yes, one of my best gifts.
You just do a humble nod with your head.
I appreciate that. So let me ask you about this, because we've chatted about this so many times, and it's like honestly one of my biggest frustrations in parts of the church where I'm like, hello, like we are body, soul, and spirit, like we are emotional beings as well. But one of the things that I have come up against, quite a lot, where it's quite frustrating, but also I see as damaging, is that this belief system that yes, we believe in healing. Yes, we believe that God restores us all the time, actually, more than we realize. But we can't pray everything away. And there's no, I hate the word balance. It's like more finding, I think this was you that said one time about rhythm. I like the word rhythm way better than balance, but finding middle ground, as in, yes, we believe in praying for the sick. Yes, God restores us, but also we can't pray everything away. And what do we do with all the people that aren't being healed, especially in the area of mental health? Can you just speak into that for a minute? Because that's been one of the areas I've found really frustrating in trying to kind of find a middle ground.
Yeah. Obviously, I, come from not the stream of healing as the stream of the church you do. It's one of the places I would love to drink a little deeper, because I feel like that my stream of the church doesn't see some of the miracles and some of the healings that are available for who knows what all the reasons are. But that's speaking of a place of humility that the church, my stream of the church, really needs to grow in. But I think that my understanding of that is that this is heaven. I mean, this is earth, not heaven.
Wait, what?
No, this is.
Are we there?
Not heaven, and we all eventually die.
Yeah.
Even people, even if someone were resurrected from the dead, they will die one day, and it will be the end of their body here. So we know that all healing is not, I would say, possible or even part of God's plan, because we all do eventually die.
Right.
And so in that middle ground of why are some people healed, especially even around their mental health, and some people are not, it frankly to me is just a mystery. I wish I could come up with a great, here's my fabulous theological answer. And actually, I think mystery is a fabulous theological answer. I don't have God figured out. He is not a vending machine that if I put in the exact right change, then what is going to come out of the vending machine is the buttons I pushed. He just doesn't. He operates in a world and in a sphere that is bigger than I am. I don't know. I don't know why my son wasn't healed. I begged, I pleaded, I did everything I could think of. I even felt like God gave me a fleece, and that assured me that he was going to heal Matthew, and Matthew died. And so this has actually been part of my greatest struggle is understanding why God heals some exactly the way we've asked, and some he does not. If you can see in the background, right about there, is, well, in fact, I'm going to get it for you.
Okay.
Just take a second here.
All right.
This is called my mystery pot.
Yeah.
And in my mystery pot, you can see there's those strips of paper. Those little strips of paper are all the questions I have about healing, about why God didn't save Matthew. Why didn't he? Well, he could have stopped him that night. He could have interrupted what he was doing. All the questions that I have no answers for.
Right.
I have to do something with those questions. I can't ignore them. I can't pretend they don't exist. I can't pretend they don't mean anything. They do. They have driven me crazy. They've kept me up at night. They've put a barrier between me and God at times. And I finally just realized I don't have to know. I would love to know those answers right now. I don't. So I've written them on little strips of paper, and they're in my little mystery pot. And one day, God, when I see Jesus face to face, I envision myself pulling out those little strips of paper and saying, and what about this one? And what about this one? And what about this one? And I know that some of them will evaporate in the moment in the presence of Jesus. I feel like some of them, it would be so sweet if Jesus would help me understand some of those questions. I don't get it now. I don't. But I still believe in the goodness of God. And I think that's in that middle ground is where we have to live, is that God does do miraculous things that are mind-blowing. And some of them are small miracles. And then other times he does not choose to do that, no matter how big our faith has been, no matter how big our belief has been. Listen, I went so far out onto the faith limb of believing God was going to heal Matthew, and Matthew was not healed. We have to come to some kind of a place of believing in the goodness of God in the face of mysteries that we cannot explain. I don't feel I bear any responsibility that my faith wasn't enough. I didn't trust God enough. I reject that out of hand. I know my faith. I know my trust. I know my belief. But God didn't. And I just read in Daniel just yesterday Daniel 3, I think it is, or Daniel 4, where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are being thrown into the fire. And they say, our God is able. He is able to deliver.
Right.
And the next line says, even if he doesn't, we will not turn away from him. And that's what I think, that's where we have to get to, is that our God is able. Our God is able. And even if he doesn't, I trust him.
And that's a lot. I mean, it's like, I think your mystery pot that you have, it's a pot, right? You call it a pot?
Yeah, it's a little casserole dish. It literally is a little casserole dish.
It is so sweet, though. I mean, everybody, it's such a good idea, because I think, like, we always want to fix things, and there's so many things we're not going to understand this side of heaven. It's the reality of why we need faith in the first place, and some of the harder questions of what we have, where, I mean, you and I've had this conversation where I'm like, I don't get this. I don't understand. This doesn't make any sense. And if you don't let it live in the place of mystery, like, it'll torment you. And
it will destroy intimacy with God.
Yeah.
And that's really, I read that a few years ago. I have to think who said it, but it wasn't original with me, but the idea was that's the enemy's greatest wish, is to separate us from intimacy with God. And he will use suffering and mystery and things and mental illness that doesn't go away, and losses and disappointment. He will intend to use all of that as a way to separate us from that sweet intimacy with God. And
don't you think, Kay, like, that we actually in the church need to learn how to live in the place of mystery a little bit? I could say that as the whole of the church, not just like the charismatics or the evangelical. It's like all of us.
As typically as believers today, we don't do well with things that aren't happy. We want happy, and we want all of our songs to be happy, and we don't. Man, sometimes I sit down I love on my Sabbath to sit down and play through my old hymn book. And song after song after song talks about the suffering in this life, how hard it is. It's difficult. They're longing for heaven. Why would we long for heaven when we have everything that we need? And so to be back in that place of lament, of recognizing life sucks sometimes. And there's no two ways about it. Anybody who says it doesn't is in la la land. And but lament, grief, longing for heaven, longing for what is promised. That is, we don't do well with that. And as a consequence, when something goes wrong in our bodies or our brains, our relationships, we fall apart. Because we expect something much better than that. When God says, no, this is earth. This is earth. Heaven's coming. This is earth.
Which is one of the reasons why it's been so frustrating for me in the area of mental health, because we love to pray everything away. We love to fix things. And we almost, and in some circles where if God is not healing you, that's a faith issue, which obviously is rubbish thinking. But when you really believe that, and you'll operate from that. And so if I think I have to fix you, and I mean, just think of the damage. Like, this has been one of the things where I'm like, oh my gosh, the damage of what we've done to people that have mental ill health, and praying for them, because if my goal is to fix you, do you know what I mean? And in praying, and I have talked to countless people where they're like, I'll never get prayer again because of this reason. And this is where I'm like, okay, where can we find this middle ground? Like, this isn't heaven. And we are going to suffer. We are going to have trouble. And this better not be heaven, because we should look a lot better than we do. But how do we actually, as the church, like, go forward where, there's this middle ground? Of course we're going to pray. Of course we keep asking God to heal us. But if he doesn't, and how do we
comfort? Then we offer the comfort and we offer our presence. We offer comfort. We determine to walk with people. If somebody had cancer, we would not, I mean, very few people would ever say to them ever, well, you know what, you're not getting well.
Yeah.
So I don't really know that you need to be in our church or serving. We would never do that.
Right.
But if somebody has a substance use disorder that they keep relapsing, or somebody has a mental health challenge that maybe they go kind of in and out of, or it really is affecting them, we don't have any reticence at looking at them at some point saying, get your act together.
Yeah.
And when you get your act together, then you can be part of the church, and then we can offer you fellowship, and then we can offer you comfort. And I just believe that just makes God so mad.
Yeah.
When his vulnerable children are treated like that. You look at God he got so mad at the shepherds in Ezekiel 37, the shepherds of Israel, and said, you've pushed away the weak sheep. You've pushed them away.
Yeah.
I will shepherd them. I will care for them. And you look at Jesus and his response of compassion. Yeah, that's a whole thing. But
it is a whole thing, because I'm just sitting here listening, going, because it is one of the things that I'm like, oh Lord, please let us get better in this, because I myself, if I'm going to be honest, I'm sure I've done damage in how I've prayed for people because of, how I operated or whatever, and just being unaware, just being uneducated. So I think like some of the things that you're saying, it's like one of the most loving things that we can do for one another is get educated in something. You know what I mean? So that we can learn how can I effectively pray for you?
Yeah.
How can that's not going to cause damage? I think that's the thing that is really important to me when it comes to mental health. Like we in more charismatic worlds need to get educated so we stop doing damage, and how can we effectively bring healing and not cause people to be even more distant because of the damage that we keep doing.
Right. There's and I just think there's some really practical things that every church can do. I think every church can become mental health literate. It's in the United States, it's like 1 in 5 people are going to experience a mental health challenge in the next year. So it's real. It's common. It's not like when I was an advocate for people with HIV, proportionately, there aren't that many people in the world. I mean, there are.
Right.
I mean, there's millions of people, like 38 million people in the world. But compared to 1 in 5 people living with a mental health challenge, so common.
Yeah.
So common, so real, and yet treatable. People have much better outcomes. They do better. Their lives are better if they're willing to ask and get connected to help. The church can be a part of that.
Yeah.
Can help steer people toward help, can steer people toward, getting the treatment and stuff that they need. There's so much that every church of every size, and it really starts with the determination to care for people living with mental health challenges. I mean, it sounds so simple, but once you make that decision, our church is going to be a safe, welcoming place for people, then God's going to bring those people to you. Because if you've got a warm incubator for people who are vulnerable and need just to be loved and cared for, God will bring them. And then from there, there's so much.
Yeah, that's really true. Actually, there is so much in all this, and there's so many things I would ask you, because I'm always in this tension of wanting to have that, have us be a safe place. It is one of the things I love about our church at Saddleback, is that it is a safe place in so many different areas where people can bring their stuff, their brokenness. I mean, if the church is a hospital, then we should let people bleed. And that's one of the things I love about our church, is that we're good at that. I've learned a lot in the last few years from Saddleback and you guys with this, because you are good with this. So it's one of the gifts that God has given you guys, and that we can learn more in the other streams of, especially in the area of mental health, because yes, it is I think it's 1 in 4 actually in the UK now. Like this is mental health. If we don't get educated, we're not going to be effective. And so it concerns me, but at the same time, it's a huge opportunity.
Sometimes people just don't know what to do. Sometimes people are really open, leadership is open. They're not hostile. They're not, doubting or even there, but they just don't know what to do. They don't get trained in Bible college or seminary. And so then they feel like, oh, well, that's this medical problem, and
Right.
I don't know what to do with that. Let
Right.
the medical professionals deal with it. And Dr. John Swinton, one of my mentors, I love what he says. He says, as long as we say, oh, there's a person with a mental illness, we're going to say, oh, let the medical folks handle it. He said, but if we reframe that and say,
Yeah.
oh, there's a person with a mental illness, then all of a sudden we're talking the language of the church.
Right.
Because nobody cares for persons like
Right.
the church. And so once you make that commitment, there are very practical things that every church can do.
Yep.
Simple, doesn't require a lot of money. There's stuff on my website that, there's great books. Not that I have not written a book on this, but there's other people have. There's good resources for every church.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like how we talked about, especially the personal first and the leader actually reaching out for themselves, and then for the church itself. So we'll put like all kinds of links and stuff so that if you're watching this, you can, go on the links and get the resources, because there are a lot of great resources now that weren't even around a few years ago, to be honest. So we are growing, we are changing.
Yes.
And but I love you, my friend. I think this is so helpful. I think this will be so encouraging for so many people.
Thank you. Thanks, Christy. Thank you for the invitation. It's really good to be with you in this way.
All right, we'll do it again.
All right.
Thanks. See ya. All right, bye-bye.